They say power doesn't always come in a suit. Sometimes it walks in wearing jeans and a hoodie, unassuming, quiet, but carrying the weight of an empire. That's exactly what happened the morning a black man named Cameron Bell walked into the towering glass building of Halcyon Enterprises, and was immediately stopped at the front desk. Security looked at him like he was lost. And the regional manager? Oh, the regional manager. Well, she had no idea who she was about to humiliate. But let's rewind. Because this story? It's not just about racism. It's about assumptions, revenge, and a twist so powerful it'll leave you speechless. This is the story of how a racist manager denied the CEO entry to his own office, and instantly regretted it. Cameron Bell was a man who didn't need to boast about his success. A former tech prodigy, he'd grown up in a rough part of Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. By 15 he built his first app. By 19 he sold a startup for 7 figures. And by 32 he'd quietly acquired Halcyon Enterprises, a once struggling but well-known tech company based in downtown Chicago. He didn't plaster his face on billboards. He didn't do press tours. He believed in letting his work speak for him, and oh, it spoke volumes. Under his ownership, Halcyon tripled its profits, doubled its workforce, and launched 2 revolutionary software products. But despite being the majority shareholder and sitting atop the corporate food chain, Cameron liked to keep things low-key. That's why he decided, one chilly Monday morning, to do a surprise walkthrough at Halcyon's Chicago headquarters. No entourage. No pre-scheduled meetings. No fancy suit. Just him, a warm hoodie, some Air Jordans, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked through the doors at 8:15 a.m., just as the office was starting to buzz with employees grabbing coffee and prepping for meetings. But before he could even reach the elevator, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me. Sir, you can't be here." Cameron turned to see a blonde woman with a severe bob haircut and a clipboard in hand. Her eyes scanned him like he was some kind of intruder. "This is a corporate facility. The delivery entrance is around back," she added with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not making a delivery," Cameron said calmly. "I'm here to see the offices." Her expression soured instantly. "And who exactly are you here to see?" "Well," he said slowly, "I'm here to see how things are running." She rolled her eyes. "Right. I've heard that one before. Look, we don't give tours to the public. I'm Melissa Green, Regional Operations Manager. And I don't have time to babysit people who don't belong here." Security was already watching. One of the guards started walking over. Cameron held up his hand. "No need for security. I'm just trying to." "You need to leave. Now," Melissa interrupted. "You're loitering. And we take security very seriously here. I don't care if you're some contractor or vendor. You're not dressed appropriately. No ID. No badge. That's a policy violation." Cameron's lips curled slightly, not in anger but amusement. "I see." He reached for his phone, tapped it a few times, then held it up. "Would you believe me if I said I own this building?" She snorted. "You own this building? Dressed like that? I don't know what kind of prank you're trying to pull, but it's not going to work here." She motioned to the security guard. "Escort him out, please." As the guard reached for Cameron's arm, something shifted. His phone buzzed. So did the guards. Melissa's watch pinged with a new internal alert from Halcyon's executive communication platform. "Please welcome CEO Cameron Bell visiting headquarters today. No formal dress code required. He'll be walking the floors." Melissa froze. Her eyes widened as she looked at the name again, Cameron Bell. The man standing in front of her, hoodie, Jordans and all, was the same man she just called a loiterer. Her mouth opened, then shut. But before she could stammer an apology, Cameron spoke softly. "So, now can I see the offices?" Red-faced, she stepped aside, stumbling over her words. "Mr. Bell, I didn't realize," but he walked past her like she wasn't even there. The security guard, now clearly panicked, murmured apologies too, but Cameron waved him off. Inside the elevator, Cameron exhaled deeply. He wasn't angry, yet. But he'd taken mental notes. And Melissa's face? It was the first one he filed away. Upstairs, he walked through the open concept workspace. Some employees recognized him, nodded respectfully, and whispered behind their monitors. Others had no clue who he was. He liked it that way. The real culture of a company wasn't found in boardrooms. It was in how people worked when no one was watching. But as he roamed the floor, he noticed something unsettling. Most of the people in leadership offices looked the same: white, male, middle-aged. But the entry-level floor staff? It was diverse. A lot of black and brown employees, coders, assistants, interns, but they seemed hesitant, quiet, reserved. In the lunchroom, Cameron struck up a conversation with a young developer named Kayla. "So, how's it working here?" he asked casually. She looked around, then leaned in. "It's fine. But people like me don't really get promoted. There's this manager, Melissa. She says there's a process, but..." She trailed off. "What about HR?" Cameron pressed. Kayla laughed bitterly. "HR reports to her. And nobody wants to get blackballed." Cameron thanked her and continued walking, anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. By the time he returned to the main conference room, he'd made a decision. Melissa needed to be addressed. Publicly. But not just because of how she treated him, but because of the deeper rot she represented. He sent out a company-wide notice: all department heads to conference room A, mandatory. Within 10 minutes, the room filled with confused managers. Melissa walked in last, pale and fidgety. Cameron stood at the front, no title card, no formal intro. He just started speaking. "This morning I came to observe this company, my company, without filters. I walked in like anyone else might. And what I saw was disappointing." The room was silent. Melissa tried to speak, but he held up a hand. "A regional manager insulted me, profiled me, and attempted to have me removed from my own property. But worse, I've learned this isn't the first time she's acted this way." Eyes turned to Melissa, who now looked like she might faint. "I've heard from employees who feel silenced, overlooked, passed over. And it stops now. Today I'm initiating a full-scale internal audit on hiring, promotions, complaints, and management conduct. Any discriminatory behavior, retaliation, or abuse of authority will be met with consequences." He turned his gaze directly to Melissa. "Effective immediately, Ms. Green is suspended pending investigation. And for the record, that investigation will be handled by a third-party ethics committee, not someone on her payroll." Melissa gasped, her voice cracking. "But I didn't know who you were." Cameron's face was stone. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't care who I was. Because of how I looked." The room was dead quiet as security arrived, not to escort Cameron, but to escort Melissa out. She protested, crying, yelling that it was all a misunderstanding. But her words fell flat. As she was led out the door, several employees stood up. Not in anger, but in relief. They clapped. Quietly at first, then louder. Until the room was filled with applause. But Cameron didn't smile. Because he knew this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. What he didn't know was that Melissa had allies. High-ranking ones. Executives who didn't like Cameron's leadership. Who thought he was too young. Too black. Too disruptive. And now that their gatekeeper had been exposed, they were coming for him. Behind closed doors, plans were being made. Calls were being placed. Old money and old power don't give up easily. And Cameron Bell was about to learn that even CEOs can be targeted, especially when they try to change the system. They thought he'd forget. That once he suspended Melissa Green, the regional manager who tried to throw him out of his own building, Cameron Bell would pat himself on the back and go back to his CEO's suite, never looking back. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Cameron wasn't just some token black executive propped up by investors. He was the majority investor. The sole owner. The visionary who built his wealth through grit, intelligence, and discipline, then bought Halcyon Enterprises to build a new legacy. But legacies aren't built on polished mission statements or smiling press photos. They're forged in fire, by standing up when it would be easier to sit down. And Cameron was about to find out just how hot that fire could get. Because Melissa Green may have been escorted out, but she wasn't leaving quietly. And the people protecting her? They were already plotting. They'd built walls in this company, invisible walls, keeping certain people out of power while pretending to value diversity. Cameron's arrival wasn't a disruption to them, it was a threat. The day after Melissa's suspension, whispers floated through the executive wing like smoke. Department heads were meeting behind closed doors. Directors were suddenly too busy to attend the diversity audit sessions Cameron had initiated. HR, which had always bent the knee to power, started dragging its feet. Cameron noticed the shift immediately. Where once people greeted him with thinly veiled fear or awkward admiration, now there was tension. Eyes that used to follow his movements respectfully now barely looked up. He was no longer the unseen force behind the curtain. He was the man who had cracked the door open, and the snakes inside were hissing. But Cameron didn't flinch. He doubled down. His internal audit team, composed of 3 outside investigators from a firm he trusted, began conducting interviews, reviewing emails, and compiling data. And the deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Melissa had been shielding complaints for years, about hostile management, discriminatory promotions, even pay disparities. Black and brown employees were earning 25 to 30% less than their white counterparts in similar roles. Qualified black candidates were being told, "You're not quite what we're looking for," and then watching less qualified hires take the positions. It wasn't isolated. It was systemic. One afternoon, as Cameron reviewed a report in his glass office, his assistant, Marcus, a young, sharp Morehouse graduate he'd personally mentored, rushed in. "Sir, we've got a situation," he said breathlessly. "IT flagged an email chain. You're going to want to see this." He handed over a printed transcript. Cameron read it silently, jaw tightening with every line. It was a thread between 3 high-ranking executives: Senior VP of Operations Darren Walsh, CFO Linda Petrakis, and former board member Richard Trent. The messages were blunt. "We need to rein this kid in. Can't let him burn down everything we built. What if we call a shareholder emergency vote? Say he's mismanaging. Let's leak something to the press. Maybe financial misconduct. Or harassment, whatever sticks." Cameron leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, not from fear but fury. They were plotting a coup. These weren't just stubborn executives. They were the old guard, drunk on unchecked privilege, ready to fabricate anything to regain control. He looked at Marcus. "Start recording every interaction. Quietly. Loop in legal. And keep this between us." Over the next few days, Cameron played it cool. He attended meetings, shook hands, gave small speeches. But behind the scenes he was building a counterattack. He met quietly with the audit team, pulled old surveillance footage, reviewed financial records, and started calling allies, black executives he'd mentored, journalists he trusted, lawyers who knew how to cut through red tape like butter. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But things escalated fast. Too fast. One morning, as Cameron arrived at the building, he was greeted by a sight that nearly made him laugh in disbelief. 2 uniformed security guards stood at the main entrance. One of them blocked his path. "We were instructed to escort you to the lower lobby and wait for a company liaison," the guard said. "What?" Cameron replied. "I own this building." The guard hesitated. "Sir, we were told not to let you upstairs until a meeting with the board is held." Cameron's eyes narrowed. "Who told you that?" "Senior VP Darren Walsh. He says there's been a vote." "A vote? Without his knowledge? That was illegal." He stormed past the guard, pulled out his phone, and called his legal counsel, Karen Simmons. She picked up instantly. "Karen, I need to know if the board called an emergency vote without majority shareholder consent." "I just saw the alert," she said, her voice tense. "They filed it 30 minutes ago. But they don't have a quorum without you. They're bluffing." Cameron pushed into the building and rode the elevator to the 30th floor, where Halcyon's executive boardroom stood like a palace atop the empire. When he entered, the room went silent. Every head turned. Darren Walsh sat at the head of the table, acting like he belonged there. Linda Petrakis sat beside him, flipping through papers. Richard Trent, the ousted board member, somehow had a visitor badge and a smug expression. Cameron didn't sit. He didn't shake hands. He walked straight to the front and placed a folder on the table. "That's a summary of every ethics violation uncovered in the past 2 weeks," he said calmly. "And it implicates several of you directly." Linda scoffed. "You're overstepping." Cameron's eyes locked onto hers. "I'm the CEO and the sole majority shareholder. You don't get to stage fake votes." Darren tried to cut in. "Cameron, we've appreciated your vision, but this company has traditions. Traditions like suppressing diversity, protecting racism, and manipulating finances?" Cameron interrupted. "Because those days are over. I've already alerted the press. I've sent summaries of the audit findings to our investors. You think you're playing chess? I built the damn board." The room erupted in yelling, denials, and panic. But Cameron didn't stay. He walked out, composed, already planning his next move. That evening, Halcyon's name started trending online. A leaked email from Melissa's time as regional manager was posted anonymously. In it, she explicitly wrote, "Let's be strategic about who we promote. Clients expect a certain look." The backlash was immediate. Employees rallied. A few brave whistleblowers went public. Cameron released a statement vowing transparency and real change. But then, it happened. Late that night, Cameron was working in his home office when Marcus called, voice trembling. "Sir, we've got a problem. A serious one. You need to check the news." Cameron opened his browser. There it was, plastered across the screen. CO Cameron Bell under investigation for fraud. Sources claim misuse of company funds. Beneath it, a blurry image of Cameron stepping out of his car. The article cited anonymous sources within Halcyon claiming he'd misappropriated funds for personal gain. It was all lies, but detailed lies. Crafted to cause damage. And it worked. His phone began buzzing nonstop. Investors, employees, journalists, even his mother. Karen, his lawyer, called again. "We've been served," she said. "A subpoena. They're trying to freeze your assets and block your executive powers until the investigation is resolved." Cameron felt the walls closing in. They were hitting back hard and dirty. He turned to his window, the city lights blinking like warning signals. He tried to clean the house from the inside. But now they were coming for everything. His name. His legacy. His freedom. And in the shadows, someone else was watching. Someone he didn't even know had entered the game. Because what Cameron didn't realize was that Melissa had already made a deal. A dirty deal. One that could destroy everything he'd built. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. Cameron Bell stood in his penthouse office, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass behind him, but all he could see was the storm brewing in front of him. His phone buzzed non-stop, calls from reporters, skeptical investors, even his mother asking if the fraud allegations were true. The smear campaign had gone viral, and with it, the credibility he'd built over decades was under fire. The press, once indifferent, now pounced like vultures on a fresh carcass. But what no one knew, not the board, not Melissa, not the cowards trying to sabotage him, was that Cameron Bell had prepared for war long before this battle began. You see, he hadn't become a multimillionaire and CEO of a billion-dollar firm by playing checkers while everyone else played chess. He had documents, receipts, and an ace in the hole that no one even knew existed. But still, this was personal now. They weren't just trying to take his position. They were trying to assassinate his character. And Cameron wasn't going to let that happen, not without burning the whole rotten system down first. 2 hours after the fraudulent article dropped, Cameron met with his legal team. Karen Simmons, his sharp-witted attorney, placed a series of manila folders on the conference table. "The fraud allegations are baseless," she said. But they were carefully coordinated. Financial statements were doctored from inside. Someone accessed old reports and spliced false data into your expense logs. Cameron frowned. "So they've got someone in finance working with them?" Karen nodded. "At least 2, possibly more." He leaned forward, jaw clenched. "We need names. And we need proof. Fast." Marcus, his loyal assistant, chimed in. "Sir, we just received a ping on one of the encrypted audits. One of our anonymous employee lines was used last night, from inside Melissa Green's former office. But the twist? The login came from an ID badge registered to Richard Trent." Cameron's eyes narrowed. Richard Trent, the former board member forced out years ago over insider trading allegations. He was never convicted, but the evidence was damning. That same Richard had been in the building during the fake emergency vote. Cameron felt the puzzle pieces click together. Trent had a vendetta. Melissa had the motive. Darren and Linda had the access. Together they were trying to resurrect the old empire. And Cameron Bell was the last obstacle in their way. The next morning, Halcyon headquarters felt different. Tense. Nervous. Employees avoided eye contact. There were whispers in the break rooms. Cameras hovered outside the lobby. News vans circled like sharks. But Cameron? He walked through those doors like he owned them because he did. And he wasn't coming to plead innocence. He was coming to flip the entire narrative. At the emergency board meeting, one Darren Walsh tried to block but couldn't. Cameron entered with a flash drive in one hand and a thick stack of documents in the other. "Before we begin," he said coolly, "I want to submit some evidence into record." The board members looked wary. Darren scoffed. "This isn't a courtroom, Cameron." "No," Cameron replied, inserting the flash drive into the display screen. "But you're about to wish it was." On the screen appeared emails, real ones, between Darren, Melissa, Richard, and Linda. Leaked from Melissa's corporate laptop, still accessible thanks to Marcus's foresight. The messages detailed plans to leak false financials, discredit Cameron, and install Richard as interim CEO. The room fell silent. Then came the surveillance footage. Richard entering Melissa's old office at 2:17 a.m. and plugging in a USB drive. Finally, Karen handed out copies of a notarized statement from a junior finance analyst who confessed that Linda had ordered her to adjust expense reports for the CEO. It was a bombshell. The room was stunned. The internal counsel for Halcyon stood up mid-meeting and declared the fraud claims compromised and subject to further legal investigation. Darren's face went pale. Linda shook her head in disbelief. Richard walked out without a word. And just when the silence was about to break, Cameron hit them with the final blow. "Effective immediately," he said, "all executive-level employees implicated in this conspiracy are suspended pending further review. I've also called for a federal investigation into corporate misconduct." He turned to the remaining board members. "And as majority shareholder, I am enacting Section 9 of the corporate charter. Emergency restructuring. We're cleaning house." But even with the major players momentarily neutralized, the battle wasn't over. That evening, Cameron got a phone call from a private number. He almost didn't answer, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Hello," he said. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice. "Cool. Familiar. You thought this was over?" It was Melissa. "I've got nothing to lose," she said, her tone low and venomous. "You think your little files and legal threats scare me? You forget I was here before you. I built this place brick by brick. I know where the bodies are buried." Cameron kept his voice calm. "You buried yourself, Melissa?" "Oh no," she whispered. "I made sure to leave one last surprise. Let's see how your little empire survives this." And then she hung up. Moments later, Marcus rushed into Cameron's home office with a stunned look on his face. "Sir, there's a video. It just dropped." "What video?" Cameron asked, rising from his desk. Marcus handed him a tablet, trembling. Cameron pressed play. There, in crisp HD, was a secret recording of him, or someone who looked like him, arguing with a woman in an elevator, raising his voice and allegedly saying something aggressive. The caption read, "CO caught in verbal assault. More victims come forward." It was doctored. Cameron could tell. The voice wasn't quite right. The body language was off. But it didn't matter. The video already had over 300,000 views in under an hour. The hashtags were piling up. Hashtag cancel Cameron. Hashtag bell down. Hashtag Halcyon hate. Cameron's phone started buzzing again. This time it wasn't investors. It was the police. A detective was calling to say that a harassment complaint had just been filed. An anonymous woman had accused him of workplace threats and verbal abuse. The walls were closing in again, but this time from a new angle. Melissa hadn't just been working with Richard and the others. She'd gone outside the company. And what Cameron didn't know was that someone on his own team, someone he trusted, had helped her do it. Cameron Bell had always known the game of power came with enemies, but nothing prepared him for the feeling of being hunted in a war he didn't start. Standing in the middle of his own living room, holding a tablet that now played a deep-fake video of him verbally assaulting a woman, he felt the chill of betrayal tighten around his neck like a noose. The image was wrong, the voice slightly off, but in the age of viral content and snap judgments, truth didn't stand a chance against drama. Within hours, hashtag cancel Cameron was trending worldwide. Cable news ran segments about yet another CEO behaving badly, and media personalities speculated if he would be forced to step down. But Cameron wasn't panicking, he was calculating. Because he knew Melissa Green better than most. And if she'd gone this far, it meant one thing: she was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. And he was going to expose every single one. Marcus sat across from him at the long table in Cameron's personal security room, scrubbing through the metadata of the video. "This was uploaded from a VPN," he said, frowning. But the original file has a fingerprint, low-res prototype filter common in editing software used by one of our very own marketing contractors. Specifically, Taylor Price. Cameron leaned forward. Taylor had worked on social campaigns at Halcyon for almost 2 years. Quiet, efficient, clean background. But Cameron had recently denied a proposal she'd submitted, one that involved outside partners and shady data harvesting practices. She hadn't taken it well. You think she doctored it? Cameron asked. Marcus shook his head. I think she was paid to do it. Cameron's eyes narrowed. By Melissa? Marcus hesitated. Or someone close to her. Meanwhile, Cameron's attorney Karen was digging up her own trail of evidence. After pulling employment records, she discovered a string of unusual hiring approvals that Darren Walsh had snuck through during his brief stint as interim CEO. One of them was for a cybersecurity analyst named Bryce Maddox, who, curiously, had once worked at the same firm as Richard Trent. The dots were connecting faster now. The smear campaign wasn't just internal sabotage. It was a full-blown conspiracy, and the tentacles ran deep through Halcyon's infrastructure. Cameron knew that in order to regain full control, he couldn't just clear his name, he had to burn the entire network of corruption to the ground. But before he could move forward, he had to confront the police inquiry. Detective Rowe, a stern-faced black woman with years in internal affairs, arrived at his condo that evening. We received an anonymous complaint, she said, folding her arms. The woman in that video claims you've been harassing her for months. Cameron shook his head. That video is a fake. A deep fake. I've got my tech team pulling metadata as we speak. Rowe didn't flinch. That may be. But until we verify, I've got to ask you to surrender your phone and any company-issued devices. Cameron nodded calmly. Of course. As she left, her eyes lingered on him. There was something in her look that felt unsure. Like she didn't know whether to believe him, but she wasn't entirely convinced by the lie either. And that was enough. Cameron just needed time. Time to prove the truth. The next morning, Cameron called an emergency staff town hall. His first live public appearance since the smear campaign started. The internal communication team tried to cancel it, but he overrode the lockout with his original admin codes. Broadcast on every monitor inside Halcyon headquarters and live-streamed to every employee working remotely, Cameron stepped in front of the camera in a crisp black suit. Good morning, he said, voice firm. There's been a lot of noise over the last few days. A lot of speculation. But I want to speak directly to you, the people who made this company what it is. Not the board. Not the media. You. He paced slightly, the energy building in his voice. I was denied entry to my own office. I was accused of financial misconduct. And now a fabricated video is being used to frame me for harassment. But what the people behind this forget is that I never got to this chair by staying quiet. The staff in the building began to nod. He continued, I built this company from the ground up, not for profit but for purpose. For inclusion. For legacy. And that's why it's so easy to target me. I don't fit the mold they expect. I'm a black CEO in a world that still doesn't know how to handle that. But I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere. The applause started slowly, then swelled through the building. Hundreds of staff clapped from their desks. On the internal stream, employees added digital support emojis. His words didn't erase the damage, but they reminded the company of who he was. Cameron Bell wasn't some random executive. He was Halcyon. But the real win came an hour later when Karen stormed into his office holding a flash drive and a printed email. You need to see this, she said. Melissa and Richard tried to bury it, but one of our whistleblower hotlines received this 2 days ago, and it got buried in the legal filter. Cameron took the printout. It was an email from Bryce Maddox, sent to a former colleague at Trent Enterprises. The subject line read, It's done. The video's been planted. He'll be out by Friday. Attached were rough versions of the deepfake clip, timeline notes, and even a draft caption that was nearly identical to what had been posted online. That's our smoking gun, Cameron said. Get it ready for court. But before they could act, a knock came at the door. It was Marcus and his face was pale. Sir. I just discovered something, he said, holding a manila envelope. I think you need to see it before you go public. Cameron took the envelope and opened it. Inside were photos. Dozens of surveillance stills taken from security cams in the Halcyon server room. And in one of them, clear as day, was himself. Cameron. Standing at a terminal. Alone. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago. But he wasn't there. He knew he wasn't there. Cameron stared at the image, stunned. It was another fake, but so good even he was rattled. "What is this?" he asked. Marcus looked down. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. I installed this clone protocol 6 months ago. On your orders." Cameron blinked. "What?" Marcus took a shaky breath. "You asked me to create a digital clone of you, so we could monitor interactions, run security simulations, stress test the network. You said it was for future-proofing." Cameron stood frozen. He remembered the conversation vaguely, but it had been exploratory, not active. "I never approved it going live." Marcus nodded slowly. "But someone did. And they used the same digital clone project to frame you." Cameron's mouth went dry. "Wait, are you saying my own prototype was used to create the deepfake?" Marcus looked away. "Not just the deepfake. The financial logs. The voice recordings. The internal memos. All of it. Your clone AI has been hijacked." Karen's eyes widened. "So everything we've been fighting was done with your own digital fingerprint?" Cameron slowly sat down, mind racing. Melissa hadn't just tried to destroy him. She'd used his own technology to do it. And if she had that kind of access, where is the clone server now? Cameron asked. Marcus hesitated. And then he said it. It's been relocated, off-site, to a secure bunker in Nevada, under control of Richard Trent. Cameron's heart stopped. Because if Richard had access to that server, he could generate anything. Any document. Any recording. Any version of Cameron Bell they wanted the world to see. And just then, Karen's phone buzzed. She answered it and froze. "What is it?" Cameron asked. She looked up, stunned. "We just got served." "Served?" Karen nodded, slowly lowering the phone. "They're filing for a federal indictment against you." Cameron's breath caught in his throat. And then, the front door burst open. Federal agents stormed in. "Cameron Bell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and corporate espionage." He barely had time to register it. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. And as they dragged him toward the door, the only thing running through his mind was one final thought. Someone inside his own circle was still working for Melissa. The cold steel cuffs clamped around Cameron Bell's wrists felt heavier than they should have been, not just in weight but in what they represented. He wasn't just being arrested, he was being erased. Hauled from his own luxury penthouse by federal agents, lights flashing, media already tipped off and waiting on the street below, Cameron could feel the narrative slipping out of his hands. He saw the headlines writing themselves: Fallen Black CO, Corporate Fraud Unveiled, The Rise and Fall of Cameron Bell. But behind his silence, a storm was gathering. Because he wasn't broken. He was preparing for war. At the Federal Holding Center, his legal team kicked into overdrive. Karen, loyal to the end, met him just hours after intake, slamming down a stack of papers on the interview room table. "I know who the mole is," she said through clenched teeth. Cameron's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Karen exhaled. "It's Marcus." Silence. Cameron's mind reeled. Marcus? His longtime friend? His security chief? The man who knew every password, every layer of the system? How? Cameron asked quietly. Karen didn't blink. "He created the clone system, remember? He's the one who installed the backdoor. But he wasn't working for Melissa at first, he was working for Richard Trent. They offered him equity. Promised him power once you were out. Melissa was just the front." Cameron's breath hitched. The betrayal stung. It wasn't just sabotage, it was personal. "But it gets worse," Karen added, pulling out another file. "Melissa wasn't the mastermind. She was the pawn. The real puppet master was Richard all along. He wanted your company, your image, your legacy. So he used Melissa's resentment, Marcus's greed, and the clone system you authorized to set the trap." Cameron stared at the wall, remembering the years he'd spent mentoring Marcus, sharing meals, confiding in him like a brother. And all that time, Marcus was waiting for the right moment to gut him. "Where is he now?" Cameron asked. Karen gave a bitter smile. "Gone. Disappeared. Rumor is he's already in Nevada with Richard. Probably inside that off-site bunker, guarding the clone server and preparing for the next phase." Cameron straightened his back. Then that's where I'm going. A week later, Cameron was out on bail thanks to a federal judge who'd quietly been following the media frenzy and saw holes in the prosecution's case. Using emergency injunctions and insider knowledge of his company's tech infrastructure, he got a team together. Cybersecurity experts, loyal employees, and Karen, all willing to go with him to Nevada. If they could retrieve the cloned server and extract the access logs, they could prove everything. The sabotage, the deepfakes, the conspiracy. But most importantly, they could clear his name. The facility wasn't some run-of-the-mill server farm. It was a private data fortress, buried underground in the Nevada desert, surrounded by electric fencing and off-the-books security teams hired by Trent Enterprises. But Cameron had a plan. Under the cover of night, using old access credentials Marcus had foolishly recycled, they slipped through a maintenance entrance. Karen monitored comms. Security's doing 20-minute rotations. You've got 6 minutes in the central core before the next sweep. Cameron, dressed in all black, led the team into the server vault. The room buzzed with energy. At the center was the core system, a massive cylinder of servers encased in glass, glowing red with halcyon underspawn blinking across the top. As Cameron approached, a voice echoed behind him. "Well, I didn't think you'd actually make it here." Cameron turned. Marcus stood in the shadows, gun drawn. "You should have just stayed down," Marcus said, voice cold. "You had everything. But it wasn't enough, was it?" Cameron took a step forward. "You betrayed me." "I did what I had to do," Marcus said. "You think they were ever gonna let someone like you keep that kind of power? You think Halcyon was really yours? You were always just the face man. A symbol. A quota. They were gonna take it eventually, I just got ahead of it." Karen appeared behind him, hands raised. "You really think Richard Trent's gonna make you his partner? You're nothing to him. You're just the cleanup guy." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Shut up." Cameron stared him down. "Then pull the trigger." Marcus's hand trembled. He didn't shoot. And that hesitation was all Cameron needed. With lightning speed, Karen grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and slammed it into Marcus's side. He fell, groaning, and the gun skittered across the floor. Cameron cuffed him with his own zip ties and turned back to the server. "Download everything," he told the techs. "All clone activity logs, voice model templates, metadata files, everything." Minutes later they were gone. And by the end of the next day, the data was in the hands of a federal investigator. The fallout was nuclear. Melissa Green was arrested for fraud and defamation. Richard Trent was exposed in a congressional hearing for corporate espionage. Dozens of internal Halcyon emails surfaced showing the plot in motion, from the video fabrications to the financial setups. But most importantly, Cameron Bell was exonerated. Publicly. Loudly. Permanently. The Department of Justice dropped all charges and issued a public apology. News outlets ran retractions. And Halcyon's board, once drunk on doubt, unanimously voted to reinstate Cameron as CEO. On his first day back, Cameron walked through the lobby of Halcyon headquarters. This time, no security guard dared stop him. Employees lined the halls, clapping. Some with tears in their eyes. Others with fists raised. Not because he was rich. Not because he was powerful. But because he had survived. Against the lies. Against the betrayal. Against the system. He stepped into the boardroom where it had all started. The place he was once locked out of. And now he took his seat, at the head of the table. He looked around at the faces of the board. And then he said calmly, "Let's talk about real change. Never underestimate the strength of a person who has earned their seat at the table through integrity and grit. Racism, envy, and betrayal may slow you down, but when you lead with truth and character, the lies will always collapse." They tried to erase Cameron Bell with fake stories and stolen power. But in the end, the truth spoke louder. And the very people who tried to block his path were forced to watch him rise, again. The end. Speech Balloon, what did you learn from Cameron's story? Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because every struggle has a story, and every story holds a lesson. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths.